another place I work used to tease me all the time. He'd come by the office and said, well, if I'd only used 100% of my brain, and I'm like, oh, you are using 100% of your brain. You can talk, you can walk, you can see this text, you can read this text, you can maintain your posture in your chair. You are using your brain and using 100% of your brain, okay? But some questions we need to ask about the brain as our field has increased exponentially in its knowledge is, how does our brain learn? What happens neurologically when our brain learns? Well, we're going to learn about today that when we're learning something, it triggers a group of cells in the brain called neurons to fire in a sequence and to send messages in a sequence, okay? And that ultimately leads to a more permanent store in our brain. So, knowing what we know about how the brain works, how can we use this? That's the most important part. What good is research if it just sits there in a journal, okay? My ideal is to give psych away and to help others. How can we use what we know to promote learning in the classroom, okay? And what are the benefits of this research and future research? Okay? So, start out with a little demonstration. I have lots of demonstrations, but I like to think actively, okay? So, with this, I want you to think about this. Who's heard the song, The 12 Days of Christmas? Okay? I want you to write down the gifts. Can you remember them? Okay, do we have some, who can tell me what the gifts are? Most importantly, what strategies did you use? The first day of Christmas, it's a
Partridge in a pear tree?
yes. On the second?
2 marshmallows.
Huh? Now we can look it up and get the answer.
2 turtle doves.
Two turtle doves. Okay?
French
Three?
hens.
Huh?
French hens, right?
French hens, yes. 4?
Calling birds.
Calling birds.
Yeah.
And a 5 you should get, and I'll tell you what.
Golden rings.
Golden rings.
Wings.
Yes, 6. Whoa.
French hens.
Geese.
6 geese a laying.
Six
Yeah.
is really big.
Yes, 6 geese a laying. 7.
Mills a making.
Swans a swimming.
Swans a swimming. 8.
Geese are laying.
Geese a laying. And then we have 9.
Lords are leaping.
Lords a leaping. 10. Maids a
Drummers drumming.
drummers drumming. 11. Maids of milking. Okay? Now, what happens is
What happened to 12?
Drummers, drummers.
drummers drumming, isn't it? We have to look up our answers. Okay, but the point is, there are some things about memory phenomena that don't surprise me here. Why is it easier for us to remember the first one? The partridge in the pear tree. Yes.
Because we always have to repeat it.
Yeah, we repeat it in the song, okay? So our brain works by repetition. The more we repeat the information, the more likely that neural circuit will be formed. So if in our classes we have this tendency when we to study a lot before the final, don't we? And then after that it goes down. study a lot before your test and then it goes down. So we jinx ourselves when we don't space out our study behavior and have repetition involved. Why am I not surprised about the 5 golden rings?
Because we said.
5 golden rings. It's got the attention to it and the emphasis to it. So our brain learns when there's novelty, when we can make it novel, and when it's attention gathering. So if we want our students to learn based on our brain, we have to find ways to grab their attention. Okay? We have to resist a tendency I see in some students, and that's approaching your textbook and your reading like you would approach a Google search. What do we do when we search Google? We look up something, we find an article, oh, that's interesting, grabs our attention, we click on it. Oh, that's interesting, grabs attention, and we click on it. But what's not there is any rehearsal of that information, any long-term context, or long-term retention of it. So this little demo says that based on how the brain works, novelty is important, grabbing attention is an important thing, repetition is important, and also we need to appreciate different strategies. The more we can have different ways of processing that information, the better. Who sang the song to yourself? Okay. And did it help? It does, doesn't it? When you can put the content to music, we can learn it a lot better. And there's a whole science behind that. That's a different lecture, looking at autistics and music therapy and how putting it to music can help them learn language so much better. Okay, so now what happens in the brain when we learn? We've got lots of systems involved, and it's not just one system, okay? There is a structure embedded deep in our brain, it's called the hippocampus, okay? Hippocampus is coming up later. And this hippocampus is responsible for short-term memory. It's like our memory storage system, okay? And it's responsible for getting new information in. It's not where memory is stored, but new information in, okay? We've all experienced problems with our hippocampus. If you've ever gone to the grocery store and forgotten what you intended to buy, okay? Or misplaced your cell phone, okay?
You walk into one room and you're like,
Yes.
what did I come here for?
That's right. Oh,
That's the one I was saying.
definitely. Okay. That's your hippocampus. That's new information in. So what happens is our hippocampus interacts with other structures in the brain to create these neural loops. So for instance, the hippocampus might interact with the occipital lobe when we're learning to identify visual symbols, okay? So learning to identify letters, learning to identify the different names of animals and names of our family members. So it would form a neural loop between the good old hippocampus, the occipital back here in the back of our head for vision, and then other structures that are specific for verbal skills. And that would be Wernicke's, for instance. So two critical there are the hippocampus and Wernicke's. So we form these neural loops. So as I'm learning something new, if I were learning a new list of words, it would be a loop between the hippocampus and the occipital and other structures involved in long-term memory. So as I'm learning those list of words, I think of kids with a list of vocabulary words or spelling words. They'll go over them, over them, over them, and repeat them. Then it creates a neural loop, and then eventually it gets transferred into more longer-term stores, okay? And that's not just for verbal learning. We know a lot more about verbal learning, because that's where we've done a lot more research. But that applies to a lot of other types of learning, okay? If somebody, yes,
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm wondering if using, and I'm not familiar with where in the brain the five senses are stored.
Yes.
But it seems like if you go to the back of the brain and then the other parts, if you involve all five senses, is
Yes.
that spreading out?
definitely,
Tap, okay.
excellent.
Part of the brain.
The more you can involve all these different areas, the better. In general, in some, our sensory areas are in the back of the brain and our output areas are in the front. Okay, so information moves in from the environment up your spinal, up from your sensory organs, up your spinal cord to your brain in the back. And we process vision way back here. Doesn't seem that way, does it, when I look out in the class, okay? It seems like I see you, okay? Okay, but it's way back here in the back. We process sound on our temporal lobes on the side, okay? And our sense of touch, okay? And our body position in space is parietal lobe. The parietal lobe gets somewhat neglected, but the reason I can walk around this room and not slam my hand into the corner of this desk is my parietal lobe keeps constant monitoring of where my muscles are, so that I know just how much space I have, so that I know I need to navigate around this. It's one thing to see, another thing to integrate my movement with the side. So these are where the senses are located. And then once information comes in to the senses, it moves towards the front for us to be able to respond, okay? So if I were to ask a question, just for instance, if I were to ask, what's your favorite color? And you responded, okay, how that would generally work is you would have to hear it, right? So the first thing would be hearing. So it would go in your ears to your temporal lobe on the side of the brain. Then, for you to understand that question, you have to have some memory of those words. Okay? It has to be long-term memory there. So that's where your hippocampus and another structure called Wernicke's comes in. And now, at the level of the temporal and parietal, you can now start to understand what the question means. Then it goes across to the front part of your brain, the motor areas, and then you can speak and answer back. Yeah. So, the more we can use different senses, the better we can learn. The more we can involve our students with graphic presentations, putting it to music, using different types of mnemonics, the better we are. So our hippocampus is basically where it all starts. It's where short-term memory starts. So if we're presenting our students with some new material, it starts there in the hippocampus where we're learning that new information. And our challenge is to keep it there long enough, okay, that those neural loops are formed so that it becomes a more permanent memory, okay? And we have three processes involved. One is encoding. That's the sensory input. Using all the senses helps us learn much better. And sometimes we forget that there are other senses we can use too to help people. For instance, sometimes I've forgotten my passwords, and then I'll start to make the movements, and it comes back. That's motor learning. That's visual learning and motor learning to trigger memory. So the more we can use additional senses, the better. Storage, is that long-term storage? Yes. Where it
Yeah.
says. Yeah.
When you're talking about the motor thing, it literally just popped into my head. My dad's very forgetful, and one of the things that he usually forgets is his PIN to his own card. And he one time woke me up in the morning, this is on a weekend, he woke me up and he's like, son, what's my PIN again? And I actually had to make it out like I was actually doing the motions on the keypad and remember it.
And then you remembered it, okay? That's recruiting other areas to trigger that neural loop. Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of like the I have an iPhone, so I don't have the weird
Uh-huh.
lock screen where you drag it around, but mine
Uh-huh.
is similar to dragging.
Yeah.
But what I was gonna say was, so like, I remember hearing a while ago, you were relating like remembering things and then moving it around
Uh-huh.
to your motor skills and stuff like that. Isn't it true that muscle memory isn't real? Like, it's all in your head? Like, the muscles connect, your brain connects through your muscles,
Uh-huh.
but your muscles can't remember it.
Yeah,
That's
it's
what-
not stored in the muscle.
People think it's stored in the muscle.
Right, it's, they do, they do, it's not. No, it's stored in your neurons in the brain, okay?
Yeah.
Muscles don't have that capacity.
Yeah.
We wish, that would give us more cortical area, you know, to devote to other
You
things.
barely have the capacity to lift up like
No,
50 pounds in one hand. Come on.
right. Okay. We also showed primacy and recency. Your students are going to remember those things that come first and last, okay? So you have to keep in mind what comes first and last is what they're going to remember the most. So it's important. I start my classes with goals for the classes and aims. It kind of like you provide that structure at the beginning. Then you come back and you form a loop and you reinforce that structure at the end, okay? So that's using primacy and recency. Now, maintaining focus during a task. With all these areas, we used to be in neuroscience, look, we wanted one structure, one function. We wanted to know where is memory, okay, where is vision. And we learned that the brain works as a system. It's not one area. It's a system, several areas involved, okay? And even our brainstem, okay? So on our task, we remember those 5 golden rings being accentuated because it grabbed our attention. And this relates to little structures in our brain called the reticular formation. Reticular formation is actually not a structure in the sense of being cells. It's a group of axons, okay, that extends along the brainstem. So this would be your spinal cord coming up, and this would be your hypothalamus, and this would be your pons, and the reticular formation comes behind it. Bless you. The reticular formation wakes us up and puts us to sleep. So when that alarm clock goes off in the morning, it's your reticular formation that is slowly waking you up, okay? And at night when we're tired, it's our reticular formation that is putting us to sleep. Now, in the developing brain, especially adolescents, we find that adolescents do their better work late in the evening, okay? And early in the morning, when it's time for school, their reticular formation is at its lowest, okay? And it's not that our daily, the reticular formation shows daily patterns of highs and lows. And that really doesn't stabilize until we start to hit the college years. But, so high school students really do have better levels of attention, higher levels of reticular formation activity later at night. So actually their best studying might be from like 9 to 12:30 at night. Yet they can't do that. If you have to get up at 6 o'clock to make your bus, you can't do that. So it's like some of our students are fighting their biological clock. When they need this reticular formation to be at its highest, we're actually fighting our physical norms.
That might be why they decide several times to go to high school. just
Yes,
not later.
they do. That's why there is that push to try to get the high schoolers to start later. Okay? So now what this means is I'll do another little demo. I love demos too, so that we can see how these structures interact when it comes to the importance of attention, okay, and moderating students' attention. For this one, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a letter, and I want you to generate as many words as you can think of from that letter. It's a competition. I want you to write as fast as you possibly can, okay? However, there are a couple rules. There'll be 3 letters, and you'll have a minute to write on each letter. We take a few seconds break on the in-between, okay? So, when the few rules you have to keep in mind. 1, you can't say proper names, okay? So if I give you the letter T, you couldn't say Thomas or Tennessee, okay? 2, plurals don't count. So if you said tree and trees, that's just 1, okay? You can't do numbers either. So you can't do 20, 21, 22. And of course, please keep it clean, yeah? So, okay? So, now, when we look at this, okay, so I'm going to give you a letter, and I want you to generate as many words as you can that begin with that letter. This is an FYI. This is called the Thurston Word Fluency Test, okay? So, first letter, you ready? Hold on, let me get my timer up here. You ready? First letter is F. Stop. Okay. Second letter, you ready? It's competition, as fast as you can. Okay, second letter is A. alphabetical letter, but there's a reason why you blank. And this test is called the FAS test, or the Thurston Word Fluency. It is a classic neuropsych test looking at the frontal lobe. But with all the words you generated, nobody has any neuropsych problems. You'd have like 2 or 3 at best if that was the case. But I use it because we very often see the same phenomenon with blank. We're going along, we absolutely blank. The reason for that is I have overstressed your brain. One, I'm testing you in a way that your memory is not organized. Your memory is not organized alphabetically, okay? You're not organized that way, okay? So I'm testing you in a different way than the information is organized in your brain. Our brain organizes things in terms of hierarchies and relational hierarchies, not alphabetical, okay? The hierarchies are called a schema hierarchical structures. So I'm testing you in a different way. I'm also stressing you. I'm trying to put you under pressure. You have a minute. You want to generate as many words as you can. It's a race, okay? And I'm hoping you're looking at each other. Oh my gosh, during all these, I gotta keep going, and move faster, okay? So I'm stressing you. And I'm specifically overstressing that frontal part of your brain for higher order intelligence. The frontal part is the area that has to keep also those rules in mind. So not only am I testing you in a different way than your brain is organized, I'm also asking you to keep a lot of information in mind. You have to keep those rules in mind, okay? And I'm stressing you. So when you have those 3 components, testing different than you've learned it, overstress, and keeping multiple rules in mind to prevent a response, it's no surprise that you get that blanking phenomenon, okay? Now, multiply that by 1,000, and you can see what might happen to a student, okay? And sometimes when they're tested in ways that are different from how their brain is organized, especially when you add on the stress and all the additional rules and the time crunch. It's absolutely normal to see that. And that's because our frontal lobe has to keep all these things in mind in order for us to be able to do that. Okay, so what do we mean by learning when we're talking about the brain? I've introduced some critical structures involved. We have 86 billion brain cells, roughly, okay? And they're all connected through synapses. And when we learn something new, such as I introduced a new term today, the Thurston Word Fluency Test. So when you're learning that, we form a network of connections between events, okay? There's going to be the term long-term potentiation, traditional lecture format there, but I'm also hoping that that will go through your hippocampus and you're going to associate it with the activity that I just did, okay? And remember, yeah, I remember blanking, and you'll remember that overstress and keeping the rules in mind and using the different senses that I did to do that, to make that process of long-term potentiation, recruiting more areas of the brain, okay, to make that learning stronger in terms of its biological basis, okay? So long-term potentiation is in sum. When we recruit all these different areas to learn something, like on the FAS test, it's a neural loop that forms that ultimately leads to a long-term memory. Now down the road, you might forget the name Thurston or the title of the test, okay? But you will probably remember the FAS. You'll probably remember when you blanked, okay? Because that's more experiential based and multimodal learning, okay? So engagement, the the more we can engage our students, the better. That's listening. We can get just listening, we get them talking, we get them reading, we get them writing, we get them involved in activities, even if it's thinking of Christmas songs in their head, like the 12 Days of Christmas, okay? Distributed practice is key. We all, as college students, we have busy lives, so we tend to study more before the test. Our study behavior goes down. That does not promote long-term retention. You'll get it for the test, but down the road, when it's time for the final, it might be gone because of that cramming. There's also a phenomenon in the brain that's use it or lose it, okay? If you don't use what you've learned, it fades away. Now, it's with the brain, we don't really forget. And you gotta be thinking, wait a minute, I forget things. What happens is newer connections replace it. The brain says, okay, we have some new potentiation we have to engage in. So new stuff replaces it, and it becomes harder to access. So for instance, if I were to ask you to name some people who were in your first grade class.
I remember one.
You remember one, okay?
I do too, Greg and Joe.
Greg and Joe, okay? Okay, now, what would happen to your memory though if you went back to your old school?
Ooh.
And your old classroom?
You might start remembering.
Huh? You would remember more,
Yeah.
okay? So when we add all those contexts back, if you went back to your old school, maybe sat or stood at a place close to where you sat, all of a sudden you would start remembering the other people that were at your table or other people at other sides of the room. So we might think we've forgotten and that we only remember those people that we were really good friends with, but we really haven't. We just can't access it anymore. And that's where the use it or lose it concept comes into play, okay? Now, when we form that neural connection, that neuroplasticity, it's all about forming new synapses. So synapses are junctions between cells. Cells have different parts to them. Brain cells share things with every other structure in the body. Who's had anatomy and physio or some bio? Who in the group's had some bio or anatomy and phys? Okay, so we're good on that one. So brain cells, they have structures in common with all other cells in the body, yet from your anatomy and bio, you know they have dendrites and axons that send information to and from it. And it is the synapse, the gap, this gap between the cells, the sending and receiving cells, is really where all the change occurs, okay? It's forming new synapses. So when we learn something, we don't get new cells for it, we get new connections. We get new synaptic links between cells in the brain. Okay, so to facilitate this process, there are things that our brain needs. We know about use it or lose it, but we also need to take care of our brain, okay? And if our brain doesn't get the things that it needs, it's not going to function as well for us, okay? So the brain uses roughly 25 to 30% of the body's energy. It functions best when glucose levels are stable, okay? And we rely on complex carbs, fruits, grains, veggies, and protein, okay? The brain stores water in vacuoles, and water is essential for learning. In fact, dehydration is one of the biggest causes for people to bring their siblings and family in to see neuropsychologists, because dehydration can appear to be a severe neurological impairment when we're dehydrated, okay? I have this mug that I sometimes bring into class that shows how much water we're supposed to have in a day. It's really big. And it has all these facts on the mug. I like to use things to help people learn. And one of my students said, that would would be the best beer mug I've ever seen. Oh, that's not the point. It's the worst point for it. I haven't used my mug since. But anyway, it shows just how much water we need during the day. Okay? Without it, you're going to get dizziness, fatigue, etc. Sleep and exercise are also crucial. Okay? Sleep's always been a mystery in neuroscience because it's something we spend 1/3 of our life doing, yet we still don't know 100% why. There are a lot of theories. The theories I tend to ascribe to are one, restoration. It's a time where the brain restores neurotransmitters and gets rid of the byproducts of the neurochemical process. And also, I subscribe to Hebb's learning theory because when we form those neural circuits and that neural potentiation occurs during the day, it just doesn't stop when we go to sleep. That continues on at night. So there's a lot to be said for the learning theory of sleep. Now that doesn't mean you can get your textbook on audiobook and play it while you're sleeping and learn. Wouldn't it be nice if we could? We can't really do that. It's only things that we've actively learned right before we went to bed. And one time in graduate school, I'll never forget it, I dreamed a solution to a statistics problem. It was a problem in my stats class in graduate school, one of those tough problems that you're struggling with, you're thinking about. I was going to put it away and go back to it in the morning. I dreamed the answer to it. And I'm glad I woke up and wrote it down. Okay? And that is Hebb's learning theory in action. I was thinking about it right before I sleep, neural circuits continuing.
When I was in elementary school, I remember, and I still remember to this day because that's how powerful it was. But we were just getting into spelling, and I don't know why, but I had a weird dream that I was reading a book about spiders. And beforehand, I did not know how to spell spider. Just, you asked me to spell it, could not do it. The day after, S-P-I-D-E-R. Never really seen the word that much, never really heard the word that much, but now I can just remember it off the top of my head.
Wow. So they say the best thing to do if you have a test the next morning is that is the last thing that you study before you go to bed and the first thing you review in the morning because the sleep will help the potentiation. Okay. So now, I talked about this a little bit, the problem with cramming. There's not enough time for that hippocampal transfer into long-term memory. It stays at more of a short-term level. It's not enough time for those new synapses to form, okay? So we might get it for the test, but then it's gone when we go to study it for the final. It's quickly lost, okay? And also, when we engage in cramming, it's harder for us to gauge in higher levels of thought, such as critical thinking. Because if we cram, the information came in for the test and now it's gone or really limited, we're not going to have it there if we have to engage in higher level thought in more advanced classes and other things. So cramming isn't good. Here's some of the research on sleep and what we call long-term potentiation, how sleep promotes learning, okay? Now, sleep promotes what we call both episodic and semantic memory, okay? So, episodic memory is our personal memory, okay? Our absolute personal memories. So, if I were to ask, let's see, use a quick demo here. What is this? We all know what it is, right? It's a remote control, okay? So, everything has both a personal connection and a semantic. Semantic is information that we share with our culture and our environment. So we all would know the term that this is a remote and what we do. If we have a different language, we have a different term for it. But only I might know that this blue is about the same color as my car. I have a blue car. That is what we call episodic memory. So episodic memory is our personal memories for things and events, okay? So if I ask what this, all of us would know what this is. It's a computer, okay? Only I would know roughly when I bought it, okay? When it was purchased, okay? So sleep promotes both our personal memories and our semantic memories. And the more, when we teach, we can link these two, the better off we are. So the more we can try to make the information personal to our students, or allow them to have a personal connection, the better it is. That's why when I teach my physio class, I always have case presentations, because I can give a lecture on the different types of disorders, and you can memorize the information, but it's very different to actually see a patient with that particular disorder. Now, we believe that the actual learning during sleep, the long-term potentiation, occurs whether we're asleep or awake, but we see it during these spindles. We see 12 to 14 hertz spindles of activity in the brain. And we believe that is possibly when information from our day is being transferred into more permanent memory stores. This is kind of what a sleep spindle looks like. So we're in like a stage 2 of sleep, then we get a sudden burst of activity here. There's a lot of research that suggests that that burst of activity is actually where the long-term potentiation might be occurring. Okay, now, when we look at sleep deprivation is terrible for the brain, okay? UCLA researchers and others have discovered a gene carried by roughly 3% of us that confers adequate sleep in only 6 hours. So some of us need more sleep, some of us need less sleep. The idea of needing 8 hours is a myth. Some of us can get by with less, some of us can get by, need more. It all depends on our ability to get deeper stages of sleep, what we call deep sleep, the big delta type waves that we see. Deprivation of sleep leads to foggy brain, impaired vision, worsened driving, difficulty remembering. So if your students are tired, they're not going to learn as much as we would like, you know. So, and for a lot of reasons for that, okay? Now, if you have a sleep debt, there's no way to really get your sleep debt back, but the best thing you can do is to try to establish your normal daily routine to get yourself back. Okay. Now, exercise and learning, okay? We once thought that exercise helps the brain and speeds up this long-term potentiation process, okay? Exercise doesn't necessarily cause better learning, but it does 2 things, okay? It increases blood flow, okay? And increases activity, alertness, reticular formation, and those transmitters, which are all going to promote learning, okay? So there have been some of the classic studies, we're psychologists, so we look at rats, but some of the classic studies with rats would look at rats who were raised in standard sterile animal cages, others who had an animal cage with an exercise wheel, others who were in this big container that had a complex learning environment. Lots of toys to climb on and get their exercise with toys and climbing over it, and it was social. There were other rats in there, okay? Then we looked at a learning variable, how quickly they learn things, and they did dissection, so we looked for the structures we were talking about. And they find that it's not just exercise. We find the animals with the exercise wheel did better, those in the sedentary cage. But the ones that did the best were those in the complex environment. So they got the exercise, they got the social stimulation, and the challenge, because they would mix up the toys in there all the time, okay? So exercise is important for the brain, very important, but especially if we mix it up and we use the brain and challenge the brain. Okay. Now, some of the things that happen when we're learning, okay, and what goes on neurochemically, there are a lot of neurotransmitters that are involved in learning. There's, of course, I can't possibly go through all of them, but there's a big neurotransmitter called glutamate. Glutamate is a major excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. Okay, it wakes us up for everything. So if you like coffee, you like glutamate, because the end result of that cup of coffee is a slight boost in your glutamate. It's a chain reaction through some other neurotransmitters, but the end result is glutamate, and that promotes learning. Another is the MDMA receptor, MDMA, which is a big neurotransmitter that is involved in learning. Then we also have the BDNF, which is exercise activates a BDNF, a protein inside nerve cells. It enhances dendritic and axonal branching, as well as stimulates the growth of new neurons. We need the BDNF to, it helps us take in information, to process it, associate it, remember it, and place it into a context. Some other neurotransmitters that are very involved, stimulated by exercise, and they also help us learn, are good old serotonin, okay? Which is, everybody thinks of serotonin as just the mood neurotransmitter, but it's not. It's involved in a lot of things. And actually, the neurotransmitters have different effects depending on where in the brain we're talking about. Of course, dopamine, I always tell my students, when in doubt, say dopamine, because it's involved in so many things, okay? And NE, or norepinephrine, that is, what that is that is a major excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. And now it gets to glutamate. Using our senses. Senses are very, very important. The more we can, as you excellently pointed out, use our senses, the more we can learn it. We talked a little bit about schema processing and kind of putting the model together when I did FAS, but essentially we have a couple structures here. Our hippocampus is our short-term memory, and then it kind of forms two loops. One loop is it goes from the hippocampus to the left hemisphere, and that's the left side of our brain is more verbal. So when your students are learning that list of new terms, okay, where I just give out a list of new structures for my physio students to learn, okay? A loop is formed between the short-term memory with my talking about it and the left hemisphere of their brain for them to learn all those new terms. At the same time, we have another major loop going on in our brain, and this goes from the hippocampus to the right hemisphere, okay? So this is where music and mnemonics and integrating other senses and context might help us out, okay? Our studies of learning are so much focused on the left, we forget about the right. The right is critical to learning, okay? You see, patients can have a lot of damage in their ability to communicate and learn if they have right hemisphere damage, even though their verbal side is fine. For instance, one thing we might see, and I have to cover up my face to do this one, but if I say this phrase, tell me what it means without looking at my facial expression. I just got paid. What do I mean? Is that good or bad?
The way you said it.
Huh?
The way you said it made it sound like you're a little annoyed by it.
Yeah, the way I said it makes me sound like I'm not too happy with my paycheck, am I? That it must have all gone to the tax man. It didn't. But, or, you know, or a lot of bills that much or something. I don't sound happy about it. But if you have damage to your right hemisphere, you can't understand some parts, not all, of the right hemisphere. You will miss the prosody. You will miss the tone of voice. You will miss the sarcasm. You'll miss the turn-taking that we have in conversation. And imagine if you just heard my words. I just got paid. all you had was verbal, you would hear the words, "I just got paid," and what assumption would you make?
You have money.
It's a good thing, you can pay for lunch, so you might behave inappropriately. And that's because you don't understand sarcasm. You can't put the emotional context to the speech, and you lose your ability to understand rules of communication. You lose your ability to understand turn taking in conversation. So,
children with autism.
yes,
Exactly. They can't put those two together. And just think, if you want to think what it might be like to have autism, for a day, this is a little activity. It helps if it goes over a weekend too.
keep a little notepad of all the misunderstandings and miscommunications that could happen to you if you could not understand tone of voice and sarcasm and taking turns. We'd be in trouble, wouldn't we? I know there'd be a lot of trouble at faculty days, but
That's a good experiment.
yeah. How much, how many miscommunications would you have if you could not pick up on that, okay? You could say something inappropriate to that example. You would say, okay, well, maybe you can pay for lunch. And if the person doesn't know about your right hemisphere issue or the autism, which involves more than just the right hemisphere, they
Might get what? Offended. Easily offended.
what a rude thing to say.
How arrogant to ignore.
Someone's feelings, okay? So, the right hemisphere is a neglected part of our learning, and we really need to learn more about the right. The more we use that right, the better.
Can you ask me a question on that?
Yeah,
Are there any recent studies about perhaps damage to the amygdala in that not being able to do affect and not being able to perceive affect and not being able, if you're saying,
Yes.
on the spectrum?
Oh, there's a lot of work on the amygdala, okay? The amygdala is a structure that whenever we get annoyed, so if someone cut us off on Ramsey Street, okay? And we get annoyed, okay? Things that annoy us, okay? That's going to stimulate our amygdala. But fortunately for us, we have our frontal lobe, our executive, to come in and to keep the amygdala in check so we don't do something inappropriate. But if we didn't have that frontal lobe keeping us in check, we could do something stupid. And people do this all the time when they
Drink too much. Something stupid. Which this inhibits the frontal lobe, which means the frontal lobe
can't control the amygdala too much and they get in fights or whatnot, okay? So, the question becomes then, if this amygdala creates all these problems, why can't we just get rid of the amygdala? We can't. Because if there's damage to the amygdala, we become absolutely fearless. The animal studies, there's been some fascinating animal studies with damaging the amygdala, okay? And they look at chimpanzees naturally. Chimpanzees naturally in the wild have a fear of fire, okay? And so if you put the normal chimpanzees into a zoo-type enclosure and you have a candle in the corner of the enclosure, now the candle is all enclosed, so they can run at it and jump on it and won't get burned because it's in like a huge, secure enclosure. But most chimpanzees, they see that candle, they go to the other side of the enclosure. They don't want anywhere near the candle. They get as far as they can from it. Except the chimpanzees that have had their amygdala damaged.
they're fearless. And they don't
Don't know social skills, and they can't put together consequences. It's absolutely fearless. And a lack of acknowledging all their peers, all their associates are hovering over here in the corner, okay? Yet they run over to the candle and jump up on it. Absolutely fearless, no sense of social skills. So there's a lot of look at damage to the amygdala and maybe a neuroscience of psychopathology, the lack of fear and fearlessness.
How do you spell that word? Amygdala?
Amygdala, A-M, here, it's on this slide. Amygdala.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's what that was. I thought it was something else. Like, I was like, what? That kind of sounds similar to something I know in the
Yeah.
brain, but
Uh-huh.
I don't know if
Yeah,
if I
it's
say it
amygdala.
stuff like that, I don't know exactly what you were talking
Sure,
about.
okay? It's part of this little ram's horn that goes underneath the cortex. You have the amygdala, and it's interesting that the amygdala is right next to the hippocampus, which means the amygdala is involved in emotion, so emotional learning is so much more potent. When we can put an emotion to it, we learn more. In fact, another little demo, I don't have time for all of them, would be to ask, what is your first memory, earliest memory? And I would bet that most of them are either really happy or really sad, because your amygdala is working long before your hippocampus. And if it has the emotion there, it's planted from short term. Yeah. Any questions?
So the amygdala, that I had it in my head, but I'm trying to think
Mhm.
backwards. People who don't feel empathy or just don't have the concept of understanding what empathy is or
Mhm.
being able to, I can't remember what that's necessarily called.
Psychopath?
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was the right word, but
Yeah.
have there been studies to see if their amygdala is working properly, to see if that's going on, or is there some link between that?
There is, definitely. And there are two terms you're getting at. One is psychopathology, another is sociopath, okay? A psychopath is someone who has no sense of empathy, okay? Consequences, if it's good for the self, that's what you do. If it's bad for the self, you don't. Psychopaths can be very successful because they're very charismatic. So it's the CEO of a business who can say, okay, it's good to the bottom line to fire all our older workers and bring in part-time temps and not pay them benefits. It's good to our bottom line, okay? Good to our funding, okay?
And it, good to self is good to their job is to cut costs and create more profit.
So good to self, increase profit, increase benefits, no concern whatsoever that they're firing long-term dedicated employees of their organizations, okay? And that they're bringing in temporary employees who won't get benefits. They'll work them like 39 hours, if they're not full-time, okay? No concern about others. So what is good to self is what they do. What is bad to self is what they don't. What would be bad to self would be lowering the bottom line, okay? Increasing costs, which is what would happen if they kept older workers, okay? So it's despicable. But they have no sense of conscience. There's no sense of conscience beyond it. That is your psychopath. Your sociopath is something different. Your psychopath can be, unfortunately, they can be very charismatic because there's something they want and they use their social skills and everything to get it. They can be very charismatic. They can get people to follow them, okay? And they can be very successful. Your psychopath is different. Your psychopath has the same type of moral compass. What is good is what benefits the self. What is bad is what doesn't benefit the self. Yet, they enjoy the suffering of others. So, your sociopath is your more dangerous.
So the sociopath, there's a lot more to that definition. I'm not, that's kind of the summary, but your sociopath is someone who enjoys the suffering of others. Very sick person. Yeah.
Would narcissism be related to psychopathy or sociopathy?
Definitely, it is.
Because narcissism is all about the self, definitely.
Yeah, but
And-
are narcissists typically, do they have to fall under one of these categories in order to be classified as narcissists?
No, they very often co-occur.
So they, like, some narcissists can understand empathy? Or would that be another classification of narcissism? My grandfather was supposedly a narcissist. I didn't really see it that much with my grandfather, but apparently he was a narcissist, so I don't know.
Maybe if the empathy benefits themselves, yeah.
Well,
If there's
that would
some
make sense.
self-benefit that can come out of it, then yeah.
Because like, aren't most narcissists completely aware of their, like, well, most of them are aware of their narcissism. Like, I met people who are diagnosed with narcissism and they know they're a narcissist and they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I stay away from those people.
Oh, yeah. Don't challenge them, it turns into narcissistic injury.
Interpersonal relation, I don't associate with.
Okay, yeah, and the amygdala is definitely related to these. And I'm just summarizing those disorders, there's a lot more to that, okay? So, okay, but definitely the amygdala is related there. I can't go through all of them, but the brain is a system, okay? And all of these structures contribute to it. So, in order for our learning to work well, we have to have our reticular formation doing its job of waking us up and putting us asleep. We have to have our frontal lobe in the front part here doing its job, the executive functions, okay? We have to have our left and right hemispheres doing their job for verbal learning and for, emotional learning, okay? So it all has to work together well. And related to the amygdala, I also have some stuff, I'm running out of time today, but I do have some stuff on the relationship of the amygdala to stress and memory, and our memory under stress. Our memory under stress is terrible, okay? So the takeaway for today is there are some things that we can do to improve our brain, okay? And we know how the brain works. Repetition is key, okay? Focusing our attention is key, okay? Taking care of our health, our food, our hydration, and our sleep and exercise is a key. And focusing on our attention too, okay? I'm running out of time. This last part is about how to shape our attention, our frontal lobe attention, and to recognize when we're not paying attention. And it's a model called SQ3R that where you learn to shape your attention, and there's actually physiological evidence for the benefits of that. So if you notice your attention is shifting, make yourself stay at the task maybe 5-10 minutes longer and then come back. An hour of focused study is going to be so much beneficial for you than 3 hours of just reading words, okay? So if you've ever read that chapter and not remembered much of it, okay, you've not been focusing on your attention, okay? So it's best if you study, you have a set time for study, a non-distracting environment, and you only do one thing in that environment, okay? And when your attention starts to wane, make yourself go 5 more minutes, and then do something, a brief break. Get a soda or water, okay? Get some water, check your phone real quick, and then come back to it. Then what you'll find is you can shape your attention for longer and longer periods of time. When you do that, you'll find you're getting done in an hour what used to take 3 or 4 hours, and you're remembering a lot more, okay? Very, very important. Okay, I've enjoyed talking with you all today. Is there any other questions? I love to talk about the brain. It's just fun.
Is it all right to get a copy of your PowerPoint?
Yes, I will email them to you. And
If you send it to me, I can send it out to them.
okay, sure, I'll email it to you. Thank you. And I do want to also note on the PowerPoint, the graphics, the pictures of the brain are from the Myers General Psychology image bank. I didn't draw the images, so I want to make sure I have my citations. The Myers is General Psychology textbook, and they have all the little images and graphs of the brain.
I would just say something. It's very interesting about what you said about relating things to what the students previously know, activating that schema,
Yes.
building background knowledge, and making the lesson relevant to the students. Well, now for some reason, and I don't know what the reason is, Cumberland County Schools in their lesson plan format says we don't need to spend all that time, and we're spending too much time on those things before we begin the lesson. and I haven't figured, remember I told you about that? I haven't figured that out yet, because to me, it's the teacher's job to get the students ready for learning. And everything you just said supports what I'm thinking. You know,
Focus and review.
they're saying that you spend, I guess they're so test focused that they don't have time to do that, we gotta get down to the business of covering the stuff of the test. But to me, it's all about, how do you make it relevant? Why is it important? How does it connect to their life? And when you said about an emotional, you know.
Emotional learning part.
Learning, that makes that personal connection, they're gonna remember it. And that's what I'm focusing on, kind of school. But I still teach my students that.
Focus and
Yeah.
review.
Yeah, it's important. It's, if we forget about how we learn, and we're just in a mode of presenting information, that by PowerPoint, they're not going to retain it. And then we wonder why we don't get the test scores.
Wow. I tell you what, I think I saw it, this is the third time I've seen you do this. And it's like every time I see it, I think of something different than the time before. It's awesome, and I thank you so much for, sharing this with Joe and Joanne.
Thank you. This one had a little bit more of the emotional learning